I have to imagine being the R in the RACI or the D in the DARCI is just like a death sentence. Like, great. Now we've written down and now we have a piece of paper that says this is my fault when this thing doesn't actually go well. Like, great. I'm so glad we've done this.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I'm Rodney Evans, and that guy in the best shirt in America is Sam Spurlin.
Rodney, you're just giving me a hard time because apparently I've already worn this shirt on multiple podcast episodes. So we've just decided it's my podcast blouse. And
it's because it's the best
makes me feel confident. And, you know, I need to feel confident when I am here recording podcasts with my friend Rodney.
And that's your special shirt to make special episodes. Welcome back to At Work with the Ready, a podcast about modernizing organizations as the future of work meets the present moment.
And each episode, we turn our attention to one common organizational pattern that we think is worth digging into, either because it's awesome or because it's garbage. Yeah. And we pull it apart. We propose solutions for what to do instead.
Today, brought to you especially by our friend Sam, we're going to talk about RACIs. And if you're like, I already know everything about RACIs, that's fine, but we're gonna shed on a bunch of other stuff while we're at it. So stick around, and before we do that, let's check in, eh?
Let's check in this now strangely Canadian themed podcast episode.
Yeah, it took a Canadian turn at the end.
That's fine. We love our friends to the north.
We do.
So check-in question. Something in your physical space around you, tell us what it is and like why you have it nearby.
What it is and why I have it. Oh my gosh. There's so much stuff around me, Sam.
Well, this should be easy.
Wait, I'm going to show you something because we're going to talk about this in the episode today. So,
okay, great.
You know, we've been cooking on a metaphor about organizations and how they work. And when I was really like deep in the thinking before I had talked to anybody about it, I made this with watercolor pencils that my mom gave me.
Okay. Rodney's holding up. You want to describe it for our audio only listeners?
They have to go to YouTube and see it. It's a watercolor of the ocean. And I didn't make it because I'm an exceptionally good watercolor artist. I made it because sometimes as I am trying to figure hard things out, doing something that is visual and creative and related to those things helps get me out of my like too left-brained, too rational thing and into a different space where there's more possibility.
I love that. You know where that's going to look good?
Where?
Photo of it in the back of your next book. A book that you're probably going to write about this
probably
shit. So
probably eventually
it'll be like original drawing by the author 10 years before the thing was written, and
it's like
then you could maybe sell it. Yeah, exactly.
I love that. I'm also going to tell my mom that I used her special. She's always giving me things to relax. She's always like, here's a Buddhist waterboard. Here's a way to use. Here's a coloring book for adults. She's always like, why don't you calm down? Here's a tool for your birthday that's slightly judgmental.
I mean, it's I don't have children, but it seems like a similar strategy for like calming down like a toddler. Like, here's some drawing tools. Go nuts. Leave me alone for a little bit.
Why don't we do crayons for a little bit?
It's good for every age. All right, I'm going to stand up to grab my thing.
Yes. In your new office, coming at you from New York State, it's Sam Spurlin.
That's right.
He took it off the wall, folks.
Eagle-eyed viewers will notice I have a different background, but similar items because I didn't get rid of all my stuff when I moved. I just changed where I am. Anyway,
got rid of your shirt. Mm-hmm.
There's a bunch of stuff on here. There's a cork board with like pictures of like me and my brothers and my wife. But the main thing on this cork board are all of the retreat pins that we've ever had at the Ready. So every time we do, except our latest one, I just realized I don't know where that is. I got to find that.
You got to get it. It's a tree.
Wait, no. Oh, I got it. It's right here. It's right here. Okay. Whew. All right. Anyway, every time we do a retreat, we have a pin that everybody who is at that retreat receives. And I have been saving all of them and sticking them in this cork board, which hangs up in my office.
That's so nice. Do you know how the pin tradition started? It was before my time.
It was before my time as well. I believe it started at Undercurrent. So I think it predates even the Ready.
All right. Well, I'll have to ask Aaron about it. I'm going to see him in an hour. I'll do that.
Okay, great. Ask him about it.
Okay, great. And I'm going to ask the rest of you to leave us a review on Apple Podcast. 5 stars only, please. For our egos and our moms and our sanity. Thank you very much.
All right. Are we ready?
Yeah.
To talk about RACIs and all that other stuff?
Go, Sam.
All right. Let's dig into this then. And do you want to take the initial swing of the bat against this softball pitch of the pattern, or do you want me to do it? It has your initials on it in our planning board, but I wrote
that
it.
was wrong.
So that's
do it because this was your idea.
Okay.
Look, I'm just going to switch this around like whoop-de-doops. Now it says
amazing
your name.
Digital tools. I mean, what would we do without them?
Brought to you by Bureau. Not really. Call us.
No, but it could. Yeah, you should call us.
But it could be.
What the heck? It could be if you wanted to. All right. So you said we are going to talk about RACIs. And in even saying that, I think we have made an assumption that people understand what this English word is, RACI, that has usages way outside of organizations, hopefully. Right. It's an acronym, RACI, and it is a tool that many organizations use to try to get clear about who and how decisions are being made, who is responsible, who is, and there's lots of different versions of it. RACI, DARCI, DACI, they're all variations on a theme where you try to take all of your people, stakeholders who may have feelings and opinions about what a decision should be and try to upfront articulate kind of where is everybody going to play. So who's responsible, who's accountable, who's being consulted, who's being informed. There are slight variations based on the specific kind that you're doing. I'm most familiar with RACI. So we're going to talk about these because I have never been on a project where RACIs were not a thing that predated us in an organization. And almost every single implementation I have seen of this tool and things like it has not been particularly good. The people who use it aren't stoked about it.
No.
Yet, also, they seem very beholden to them and spend a lot of time creating them because I do think, as we will get into here, there's lots of reasons why our impulses are to make things like this and then hold them very dearly. And we think there are probably better ways to go about doing this.
Yeah.
What has your experience been with RACIs in organizations, or either as a consultant or like actually working in an organization where you had to use them?
It's mostly what you said, and it's just the old like complicated solution for complex problems thing. And we'll talk about this, but I've definitely been in conversations about RACIs where the conversation itself was quite valuable because mostly because there was articulation of what a decision was to begin with that was getting
what it
made.
Would look like.
It was like, oh, this is when we make a choice, which even that in complexity can be, I struggle with that myself, where I'm like, are we deciding something right now?
Right.
IDK, you know? So I feel like I've been in RACI conversations that are valuable, both because we're like, oh, we are talking about a decision or a set of decisions. That feels good. And some discussion about accountability openly in a group often does feel like a lot of progress compared to what usually happens, which is a lot of like politicking and implicit nudging and then, frustrate people being mad at each other and blaming each other just because like things are unclear. So I do think that there are ancillary benefits to the RACI, but then but it doesn't actually do what it's advertised to do.
Yeah, I'm glad you took that initial step into it because I actually wanted to give some initial props around it because I think it is actually the impulse to get clear on something that is very unclear is like that's right in our wheelhouse, right? Like we try to help organizations do that all the time. So I never want to like come down on an organization who is using RACIs, because it may be the only thing they know, and the thing that they are trying to solve is a valuable thing to try to get some clarity on. It all just kind of starts to fall apart in implementation, though.
I have a question, then a follow-up. My question
Yes.
is, you proposed this topic. Have you seen something recently that made you want to talk about this?
Nothing that I will be so specific as to let people see themselves directly in this. But
You're not going to subtweet anyone on this podcast?
honestly, it's the same. It's the same every time. In the sense that the exercise of creating the artifact becomes a bit of a MacGuffin, in the sense like now we're really all very concerned about making this artifact and losing sight of the conversation that we need to have to make the artifact. And then once we've made the artifact, either there's two ways it goes badly, and I've seen both. One is we just throw it in a drawer and we never talk about it again. And honestly, sometimes that's the better result. Like, we had some conversations, we wrote some things down. It was probably unnecessarily contentious, but we got through it, and now we can ignore it and like do the work. Or we are extremely beholden to this thing that we wrote down, which we probably did at the beginning of a project that is very complex, and our reality has changed around us, but gosh darn it, we spent 6 months making this DARCI, so we're going to stick to it. I'm going to use RACI and DARCI interchangeably because I just want to give, full credit.
Yeah.
And then it becomes about the artifact, which is, just a distraction from the thing that you actually said earlier on. You said the conversation is the valuable thing. And I 100% agree. To the extent that a RACI lets us have a good conversation about like who actually needs to weigh in on this thing, then it's an actual useful tool.
Cool. Second follow-up, what the fuck is a MacGuffin?
A MacGuffin? It's like a thing that is seemingly important, but actually a distraction.
Never heard that before.
Okay. Now, I may have missed that definition a little bit, but I can get an egg MacGuffin. Plenty of egg MacGuffins.
On an egg and cheese MacGuffin. Yeah. Okay. The other thing that, and then I promise we're for real going to dig into this pattern and what it is, but we're doing it. We're doing the work.
We're doing it right now. We're doing the thing.
We're doing the thing.
We're having the conversation.
Are we making a decision right now? Is this it? Here's the other impulse that comes up with RACIs and DARCIs and the DARE model, which I learned about in researching this episode. Is this, and I think this will feel familiar to people who have ever experienced life at work, because I have, it took me so much work to break myself of this habit. There is a thing that happens to us where it's like, first we have to take an inventory of all of it. Mm-hmm. And it's like, whether you're talking about RACIs or you're talking about project plans or financial models or strategies or a lot of the other things that live at the surface of an organization, which I'm just going to throw out now. We're calling that the sunshine zone. We're going to talk more about that later. But think about the sunshine zone as the layer of the ocean that light touches, that's visible from the surface. There's all this shit in the sunshine zone that are the physical assets and outputs of work. And often when we want to make something in the sunshine zone, like a decision matrix or a strategy deck, there is this impulse to first collect and document every decision or every kind of decision or every
that we might need to make,
work
right?
That we might need to make and classify them. And it's like, maybe you can tell me psychologically what that's about because I don't really understand it, but I know I have it too, where it's like, I'll look around my house and be like, I really need to clean the baseboards. And then I'll go, I should make a list of every detailed type of cleaning that needs to be done this spring. And it's like, or asshole, clean the baseboards. Because like,
I mean,
actually,
I have an answer for us.
Tell me.
If we lived in the like 1600s, we'd be like famous polymath scientists who spent their days collecting specimens of every animal they could find and making just crazy taxonomies of things. And that was valued back then because we didn't know shit about shit. But now you're just a person procrastinating on the things.
You're just a person making lists instead of like doing the thing that is the present tension or issue, or like, so the thing is about things like the baseboards and the RACI is just taking care of the issue that is at issue. Right. Might actually take care of a bunch of things, or there might be a bunch of things that would make that list that will never become issues, but we'll spend time litigating them because they're there.
Yeah, I have a less tongue-in-cheek answer along those same lines, which is we all sense that we live on the edge of chaos. Our worlds, our organizations are chaos, or at best, just complex. Yeah. And that's scary and feels bad and can be overwhelming if you sit in it. So doing things like writing down every decision we might need to make, or making a 3-year roadmap about how this really complex project is going to go, feels like a valid response to the chaos. It's like putting on your armor so that you can go out into the world and survive. But that armor is just going to slow you down and make you more likely to be eaten by wolves.
Ugh, it's so true. It's so true. So Sam, what are RACIs meant to do? Like, what's the problem that they're supposed to solve in your experience?
They're supposed to do a lot of things, which is part of the problem. When you have a tool that has lots of different ends that it is supposed to meet, it tends to kind of get diluted. But one of the main things is to create clarity about kind of who is accountable for making a thing happen. Accountable is one word that you see a lot. Who is responsible? One of the interesting things about RACIs, and as you think more about these tools and research about them, it turns into like a grammar, not a grammar, like an etymology sort of lesson. Like, really what do we actually mean by this word?
What does responsible mean to you?
Which is a fun thing, because I think etymology is fun, but also perhaps a distraction from what we're actually trying to do. But that's, I think, the main thing is like we have really difficult things to move forward. And if we don't get clear about how it's going to happen or who ultimately is going to care enough to make this thing happen, then it's in most cases not going to happen. And not out of maliciousness, but because within organizations, when things don't clearly live in one zone, one function, they tend to fall between them. They fall through the cracks in ways that are kind of predictable. So I think the RACI is an attempt at, like, let's head that off. We need somebody who is going to make this decision or make this thing happen. And then inevitably, because if it was a simple decision, we wouldn't even be talking about this. There are lots and lots of other people who have opinions about how that thing should be done. And we try to parse them into different categories to create that clarity to be able to move forward on something.
Yeah. Yeah, I often think it's meant to solve a perceived accountability problem.
Perceived accountability problem. Say more.
I often find when leaders point to lack of accountability as attention, it's a lagging symptom of a bunch of other things going on that usually, in my experience, have more to do with clarified authority and resourcing and information than actual... I often, what I hear a lot from leaders around accountability is like, you know, they're not thinking like owners and they don't sweat the business and they're not, there's a little bit of an undertone of like laziness maybe in there sometimes. Like, you know, a little governing of the commons, like they're just letting it be somebody else's problem. There's a lot of that stuff, but like, usually I find like not very far underneath that is some real systemic stuff going on where like people actually aren't clear on their roles, or they're really under-resourced on their teams, or they don't feel like they have the power to do the things and they would do them if they were, you know, like there's often a lot of, I often think that a felt sense of lack of accountability is more to do with lack of clarity than like laziness or interest or drive or anything else.
So why then does the RACI not create that clarity? Because it feels like, all right, we need to get clarity on stuff, so let's just write this shit down. Like, let's decide who decides, and now we have a thing.
Yeah. Well, I think to me, there's like two roads that branch out from there. One is the twilight zone. So this is like the next layer. You guys, this is the metaphor. You're just going to keep hearing about it. So strap in. But there'll be explanations coming. But you're all smart, the people who listen to the show, so you'll get it. The twilight zone is the layer of the ocean underneath the sunshine zone. So if up there you have the RACI chart and your strategy deck and a bunch of other things we've talked about in this show, the twilight zone is the depth of the ocean that some light gets through. So there's some stuff that goes on there that's visible, and there's some stuff that's invisible. And usually what I find is things get very clear in the sunshine zone. We write down who's accountable. And then in the twilight zone, we don't have any ways of working that bring that to life. So it's not like then there's attention paid to, okay, what is the operating rhythm? What is the resourcing? What are the skills? What are the ways of working that are needed for the person whose name is in that box on the spreadsheet to step into accountability? So that's one of the paths right from accountability into nothing.
Mm-hmm.
What's
the other path?
The other path, which is more midnight zony. So we're just getting right into it now. Midnight
so sunlight's the top.
Yep.
Twilight's the middle.
Yep.
Midnight now is below twilight.
Yeah, and midnight is where no light reaches, and this is where our individual experience, motivation, perspective, etc. lives. I find that sometimes when there is a declaration of accountability, because of people's lived experience working in fear-based cultures, there is a real hesitance to take on accountability, even if it is given. And I think there's a lot in there that happens, but I do feel like leaders who have a lot of power and just sort of like intend to give it to someone or intend to be like, you are now like consecrated as the person accountable for this, think that that's the end of the conversation. And for someone who has maybe struggled in the past with having a project fail or being held responsible for something they didn't have control over, or had a toxic manager, or been discriminated against, or there's like a lot that comes up for people that's not just like, thanks for the torch, boss, off I go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I just pictured a literal torch in your hand and like a little like pickaxe helmet sort of situation. I don't know why that flashed so clearly in my eyes when you said that.
That's so funny. I was thinking of the Olympic people.
Oh, yeah, that makes more sense than what I had some sort of caving.
I was thinking you're doing like a coal miner thing.
Yeah, I think so.
Get it.
Like going down in the depths and need my torch so I can see what's happening.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, especially when you think about in a lot of organizations, I would have to imagine being the R in the RACI or the D in the DARCI is just like a death sentence. Like, great. Now we've written down and now we have a piece of paper that says this is my fault when this thing doesn't actually go well. Like, great. I'm so glad we've done this. And no matter what I do, because it's a complex project, a complex problem, I think sometimes we forget that the default state of trying to do hard things is failure. I think. Like, I think we probably have a higher failure rate on trying to do big, audacious things than we do success rate. But in most organizations, you cannot say that. Everything has to be a success, even if we talk about how things are safe to try or we, celebrate failure, fail fast. I've seen very few that truly kind of walk the talk on that. So RACIs just kind of become your own like arrest warrant. It's like walking around with like, if this doesn't go well, now we know why.
Now we know why. And this gets to part of what I object to in RACIs. And you can talk about DACIs because I haven't worked with those directly. But the idea that those who are responsible and those who are accountable are different people, like you are starting the game like on the back foot. You're starting from there by being like, okay, so now I'm responsible. The people who are actually going to do the work to either make this a success or a failure, now I either have to influence or manage or nudge or motive or whatever. Like I'm not, I have, you're already setting it up that I have all of the blame coming my way and way less of the control over that outcome.
Yeah. Are we selling some organization short potentially? Like, is it possible that, so one way I could see this breaking a little bit better is if a RACI actually has some muscle behind it, in the sense of, if I am the responsible party here, then I should actually have authority to make things happen. So if I come to you and say like, hey, I need help doing this thing, or I need your team to do this, and we have a culture such that you either feel compelled, maybe, or you actually want to help me, is there, I guess, value in having somebody, like one person who like really gives a shit about how a thing goes? And like sometimes I try to simplify the RACI down to like, is that just what we're doing? We're trying to say like, at least we have one person who is sweating whether or not this thing happens, and we are trusting them to kind of use their judgment to go and do that. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense rationally, but like, I don't know. I think my question is that more cold comfort? The like one chest to poke, one throat to choke expressions that our clients love to use all day. Yeah. There's so little work in a complex organization where that's actually true. Yeah. That's like saying like the like Source's success or failure is based on me. Like, yes, do I feel ultimately responsible? I do. And I don't think anyone would say that I, in my role, for example, as someone who leads and stewards a thing, am solely responsible. Right. It's like there are a bunch of people who carry a bunch of things and have basically total authority over their work. Yeah. That like, can you blame me if like Ashley does a terrible job on the finances? I guess, but that feels really lazy. Yeah. I think that all makes sense. And the reason I asked that question is, as I was reading more about RACI type things, reading more about, I think Apple has the directly responsible individual. I think Compass has a single point of accountability. And as I was reading about those roles, I was actually thinking about the project steward role in how we work. And it's not that this person is, kind of like in charge and calling all the shots. But I have found there to be a lot of value when I am on a team and there is a steward. You trust that like there's a lot of complexity in how this thing is going. And we can't have everyone thinking about everything all the time. It's really actually kind of calming to know like, okay, there is a role who like is sweating whether or not this stuff happens. But I think the main difference here in a system like ours is that we have all that Twilight Zone stuff for them to lean on. And what I'm talking about is like an operating rhythm where the right conversations are happening at the right time. Supportive relationships with your colleagues, like getting feedback, like all of the stuff that you need to manage complexity, I think helps whoever is kind of in that role of like, make sure like things are moving in the right direction, which I think is a slightly healthier version than what we're talking about with a RACI. Well, I think I think that's a really good point. And I think if you use that example, something that we've learned a lot about at the Ready over the years is like sort of this like radical ownership thing is cool, I guess. But for the people who are in those roles, I'm calling them SPOAs now, I learned that today, in those SPOA roles, if you put people in a role like that without support, and not just support that they ask for, support that it is felt that is needed across, you are going to create a situation where there is not psychological safety and where there are high degrees of overwork and burnout and heroics. Because you're basically saying to people, the buck stops with you, figure it the fuck out, which is like not how thriving organizations work. So I think like your point about the project steward is an interesting one, because it's like on the one hand, yes, it's cool to have someone who has the articulated role of keeping the project architecture in mind. And one of the responsibilities of that role is to articulate to the center what they need from growth, from finance, from Tabia in her transfo role in order to do that well. It's not like you're the SPOA, figure it out. It's like you're the SPOA, and part of that means pulling what you need together to be successful.
Two things there that I love. One is that you just listed off like major parts of the ready, and then Tabia. Like she is just a function at the ready. You said in her transpo circle, but there's like, we have a finance, we have growth, we have Tabia. And like, I just nodded along with you. I'm like,
she's a whole, she's a whole entity.
I agree. We do have a Tabia. Thank Christ. Second, you made a really good point here, which is, with our project steward role that we're kind of playing with here as this SPOA sort of idea, we actually have articulated specific responsibilities that they have. Not just this kind of like general, make sure it goes good, bro, but like specific things that role is responsible for. And there are some things in there like, make sure you have an algorithm like set up so that things are being handled. And I was just getting ready to actually trying to dig into Murmur to go find the actual list, but it's a lot of like not particularly glamorous stuff that actually you're responsible for. Because that's the non-glamorous stuff done well and done consistently is actually how you get complex work done, not individual heroics, individual like expertise in its own silo. It's how do you bring together disparate parts over a period of time to actually get things done.
Well, and what you're making me think about, Sam, is how much is written into the project steward role. And I remember drafting a lot of that language in Murmur. How much of that role is like sweating the twilight zone. It's like it's not about articulating that you're the final line of defense on the project. It's that you are, if someone is going to be responsible for there being feedback, for having competent team members, for asking people on and off of projects, for holding a disciplined operating rhythm, for creating feedback loops with the ready. We don't just hope for the best. We articulate what role is going to hold those ways of working for a team, and it's the steward. And I think there are teams where that's not true, but it starts with the steward unless and until it is given or taken by someone else. And that's a really important distinction, because again, it's getting us out of that superficial level of just like a thing is written down and into what are the ways of working it will take to bring it to life that are both visible and invisible, and who is holding that. And what I haven't seen in a lot of conversations where clients are filling out a RACI, or where I've been one of the people whose name is going into the RACI, what I haven't seen a lot of is the conversation about the Twilight Zone. Like, okay, this being true, this being the case, Rodney being responsible for this product making it to market, what does that mean for our OS? What does that mean for our ways of working? Like sometimes it's like, do you need to hire? But like that's kind of it. It doesn't usually get a lot deeper than that. So I don't know where I was going. I just liked what you said. I got excited and then I lost my train of thought.
Well, and I have also lost my train of thought because, as you know from our retreat a couple of weeks ago, I'm really excited by this ocean metaphor. Because there are a lot of things we can do with sea beasts and other parts of the ocean ecosystem. Mm-hmm. But one image that I just thought of, which I may or may not make the final draft, is that if you have things in the sunlight zone, those visible type things, they are only valuable in so much as they are actually connected into the twilight zone.
Yes.
So I'm picturing like jellyfish blob at the top in the sunlight zone, but its tentacles have to be going into the twilight zone for it to survive. Yeah, sure, have an artifact where we've written down things about who's responsible and who's being consulted or whatever, but have the stuff going into the twilight zone around algorithm, around how we have conversations, around how we steer, about how we learn, that allows us to actually operationalize that. Is that anything? Is that a thing?
Is that a thing? I mean, yes. Look, I think that we haven't talked a lot about sea beasts, but the point that you're making that is absolutely bang on, and the reason for creating the metaphor is there's nothing that doesn't have components at all three depths if it is meant to actually impact the operation. There are things that don't exist at all three depths all the time, but like for them to function, it's like there is no reason to have a fantastic operating rhythm really without any clarified strategy. Because at some point, no matter how well you're working together, what are you trying to do? What is the articulated thing that you're aiming for?
Well, and I totally agree. And I bet you there's bi-directionality there too. Having a good operating rhythm gives you the space to do the strategy work.
100%. And having a great strategy, like we said in our last episode about trad consulting, having a great strategy doesn't do fuck all in the twilight zone or the midnight zone. You just have all you got is a deck, bro. You have no operations to bring that to life, and you have no sense of how the individuals who will or will not operationalize those words on a PowerPoint feel, are motivated, are able to contribute, are perceiving, et cetera, et cetera. And a RACI is no different. It's all the same thing, which is the asset isn't the work. The asset is just the asset.
Yeah. All sunlight, no twilight.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that, like a lot of things you and I have talked about on this show, part of why things like the RACI and RACIs particularly persist is because it's actually the easier work to do. It's the easiest work to get into a room and just try to predict the future and then write a bunch of stuff down and then be like, bye.
Yeah. It's the best kind of easy work in that it feels hard. Because then we get to convince ourselves that it's the real stuff, right?
The best kind of easy work in that it feels hard is the smartest thing you've ever said, maybe, to me. Ding. You're smarter in New York.
It's all this fresh northern air. I'm out of the swamp now, and here I am just breathing in mountain air.
I think that's so right, though, Sam. It's like it persists because it keeps us in the sunshine zone where we're writing it down. It feels like it's hard, but it's all predictive, so it can't actually be wrong yet. Yeah. And it allows us to avoid both the conversations about how we would actually make these decisions or do this work or be accountable or do the informing. Have you ever noticed that when they talk about inform, nobody ever says like, well, how would that work? Like, okay, so there's all these stakeholders in the I column of the RACI. Okay, cool. So what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to inform them? Send a bunch of emails that nobody reads?
What? Like at the end?
At the end?
Beginning? The middle?
In the middle?
Like, what's...
Win hearts and minds? I don't fucking know. What does it mean to inform the state? It's like nobody gets into the granularity of like, well, what would an informed stakeholder know or do or say? What would the interactions be to get them to that state? Like nobody gets into the how of that. They just go like, we really wrote down those stakeholders that need to be informed, and like it feels good because we wrote them all down. We argued about them, and then we got done.
Well, and that granularity is probably, for the most part, inherently unknowable until we actually start the work.
100%.
So that's the whole, start by starting sort of glib thing that we say all the time. Actually, I think has a lot of wisdom in it because so much of the stuff that actually matters cannot actually yet be perceived until we actually get started.
Yes, absolutely. The other thing that bugs me about RACIs is that they feel like one and done in a way that, we've talked about the ways that they make people feel more comfortable, but also I just think it is like very complexity foolish to feel like a decision is now or never before we get into the work. And so it's like there's so little at the beginning of a project. Like when you're standing at the beginning of a path up the mountain, there's so little that you actually know. And this idea, I think it's actually like full of hubris, both to think that you can predict what's going to happen on the journey and determine now how you're going to decide, or more accurately, who is going to decide what later. And also, it puts too much pressure on predicting the future when actually you could just be like, what kind of accountability or authority do we need to get started? Sam's going to set up the meetings. Okay. That might be it. Like that might be as much as we need to actually get going. And then let's decide who decides as there are decisions to make, rather than spending all of this juice up front to try to categorize decisions that we may never need to make, and create a false sense of urgency that like, well, we can't do any work until we know this. And it's like, of course we can. Of course we can.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a flavor of binary thinking that we see everywhere. Now or never. Like, well, no. Like it's like ongoing. Yeah.
Almost nothing is now or never in my experience. Almost nothing.
All right. So we're not here to just beat up on things that we don't love, although it can be fun. And to bring us back to something like we both talked about early on, is that the impulse to do something that looks like a RACI is actually quite positive. Yeah. Making the implicit explicit. It's one of my favorite things to do with an organization. This is actually one of the rare situations where most organizations take it to 11. Like, I spend a lot of time trying to get orgs to write down things that are just implicit and actually articulate them. And for whatever reason in this domain, everyone just goes hog wild.
Goes sideways.
So what should a leader or an organization be thinking about doing instead if they are on board with everything that we've just been talking about how RACIs leave us wanting?
Yeah. In the group, first of all, in the group that is actually making decisions about the project, start with what the present decisions are and the present tensions, and don't get into future tensioning. That's the easiest one. It's just like, say out loud what we don't have to decide right now, and then for real, don't decide it right now. Just be like, we will deal with that. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Like, there's a reason that there's an expression like that. It's because like we don't need to cross that bridge.
And we didn't make it up.
We didn't make that up. Yeah. It was already there.
It's an easy one in that it's simple, but it's not easy in the sense that, like, when teams actually start noticing when they are future tensioning, they start realizing, like, holy shit, we do this all the time. Like, we are always future tensioning. So once you start to see it, you can't unsee it in I think a useful and fun way. But
I agree. Yeah. And I think in teams that are like varsity around this, I have this experience at the Ready. There are times where people will go, I'm future tensioning right now, but I just need to say this out loud. And like, that's fine as long as we're aware of what we're doing and that it's not actually something that we need to solve.
Right. And what you're not saying is like, we don't need to worry about things that do actually have a long lead time or do actually require planning. I think that is the kind of overly simplistic pushback on like the don't future tension thing. But do you have any sort of voiceover that you generally give if somebody is like, well, what do you mean like to not think about the future? Like, that's how we actually make sure we don't get into a bad situation.
Yeah. I think that there is a difference between, I think just noticing the difference between long lead time and anxiety is real. Because it's like, anxiety sounds like what if and worst case scenario. Long lead time sounds like it's going to take us 6 months to choose a vendor, so we need to start that now.
Yeah. And as you said, the what if thing, I just realized too, like if we want to indulge in the what ifness, great. Now we're scenario planning, and that's an actual thing that is valuable. Activity. Not just like rubbing our worry beads about what might happen.
You're very funny today, Sam. Okay, what ideas do you have for the peoples?
I think I just want to put a little bit of finer point on some of the things we've been saying throughout, which I'm kind of in my mind calling it an arena so create an arena for good project execution and ongoing decision making. So I think RACIs become this thing that are filled with import because it is the one time that we have actually come together to think about how we actually want to do a thing. So we pour way too much importance into that. What if we had rhythms and rituals and moments where we knew we would come together as a project team and have a conversation like, hey, how did we do in the last month on the things we said were important? Oh, we did real bad. What are we going to do differently? What are we going to move forward? What are we going to change? Maybe someone else needs to step into this role. Like there's so many levers to pull if you are used to having a continuous conversation that ebbs and flows about how things are going. And I think a lot of times when I see in this kind of fetishization of RACIs, it's because we have none of that. This is our one shot. Now I've got the piece of paper and we're going to like just go until we either succeed if we're lucky or fail if we're not.
Yeah.
And there's just so much more to be done to give yourself better odds.
Yeah. That's so smart.
Rodney, hit me with your next idea.
My next idea is rather than imagining a huge decision in the future and how we might handle it, try to break large decisions down into small decisions. And I thought a lot about this actually while I was reading the research about this. There is a thing here that is very related to the sort of like binary thinking and the urgency thinking and the like, we won't get another chance to do this thinking that is related to this, which is if you are in a situation where you're like, let's see if we can break this very complex decision that we're not comfortable making into a smaller, more time-bound, more experimental, more safe to try thing. And there are forces that are like, no, I would investigate those forces. And what I mean by that is like, I've been in situations where, for example, we were like exploring a partnership and it's been very like, we're either going to do a blood oath on the full moon or we're going to do nothing. And I'm like, that's going to be nothing for me, dog. You know, it's like if you are pushing for an all or nothing mentality around complex decisions, investigate what the fuck else is going on there because there is something else going on there that is untoward.
Yeah. Yeah. Take note of all of the blood oaths that you are being pressured to make and question and look behind that curtain a little bit.
Look behind the curtain of now or never, all or nothing. Like there's something gross going on there and it shows up in decision making because it pushes people into action before there's clarity. And that is what I want people to like tune into. Are there moments of urgent decisions? Yes. Are there times that windows close? Sure. And those are the edge cases, not the norm in the pace of doing business. Yeah.
I like that. I think it's really connected to the last thing that I wanted to say, which is something around it is beneficial to have a really filled toolbox with different ways of making decisions. We often just talk about decision making as this like thing that we do. Like, yeah, we just like decide, right? But there's so many different ways to make decisions. We can vote. Somebody can just decide. We can do integrative decision making. We can use an advice process. We can use consent. There's so many different ways. And I think this is why I think we're always such an advocate that everybody in an organization, especially folks in leadership positions, should have some org design chops, because it is really nice to realize that you have kind of a buffet of choices in front of you about how to make decisions. So as an example, using something called an advice process to make a decision. So like, somebody does have a very clear decision right around the thing, but because it's complex, because it's high stakes, we have articulated that they need to go get advice from other minimal but important roles before they make that. Yeah, that's RACI-ish, but it's actually quite simple, and it's much more about creating guardrails that we can trust people to stay within rather than like railroad, like you have to stay on and we have to define it very precisely up front.
Yeah, Absolutely. And as we've said before, there's no expectation that every piece of advice is integrated, which also isn't super clear in RACI. Like the C
If you consult, do you get to
clear. Do you get to say I consulted Sam and then I ignored what he said? That's not that's not always articulated.
Yeah. I love that. Actually, that's one of my favorite things about the advice process is that it's like, if you're doing it right, it's truly advice. And I have loved examples in the past where somebody has asked for my advice on something and then been like, cool, like I really appreciate that advice and I'm not using it.
Cool.
Like that's
Bye.
like, and there's like when, if it was like somebody who I know is very good at their work, is obviously very much, they're very much deeper into the work than I am. Like I don't know, maybe this is the midnight work of decentering your ego. Like I'm okay with my advice not being taken. Probably not in every situation, but occasionally, like that's, I think, a sign of health in a decision-making kind of landscape.
Absolutely. I love that. And like in the advice, the great thing about the advice process is, as someone who gets a lot of advice, both internally and externally, you are always going to get oppositional advice. And the worst thing to do with oppositional advice is just meet in the middle. Like that is a race to mediocrity. So the great thing about advice process is getting real divergence and then being like, okay, now I have to use my own filters as the person with the most context to decide whether I'm going to listen to one of these two or make my own way. But what I'm not going to do, which again, I see in bureaucracies that use tools like RACI, is figure out how to integrate all of it until we have something so vague as to be non-controversial to everyone. At which point we have nothing of interest.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Sam, with 1 minute remaining, closing round.
Closing round.
What'd you notice, my dude?
What did I notice? RACIs are easy and fun to beat up on, but I noticed myself really wanting to kind of honor that impulse, because I do feel like that impulse to make a RACI, like we can work with that. And I feel like sometimes I am so starved for even the tiniest glimpses of like, are we on the same page? Are we seeing the world the same way? That I want to, there are lots of kind of like, let's make a RACI energy in a lot of our clients. So like, I want to get really good at noticing it and then doing that judo move into something that is so much better and we're all going to like a lot more.
I love that. I noticed that your comment near the end about decision types really landed with me. And the fact that there's so many decisions that should be executed quickly and without advice or management or layers or anything. And those sort of get swept up into the same methodology as decisions that are both more complicated and more complex is a real problem. And in some of the research that I read, there are reports that like slowing decisions down actually degrades their quality, not the other way around. Mm-hmm. And so this idea that like there are places to take our time and there are places to not, to just like fuck around and find out a little bit, was like a real reflection as we were doing this.
Cool. All right, I think we should wrap here. And as you all know, we're always looking for new topics for the show. I can't come up with every single banger here. We need ideas. We need ideas from other folks. And if you have one of those ideas, what we call an organizational pattern, you should shoot us a note at podcast@theready.com.
This show is engineered by Taylor Marvin and produced by our dear friend and recent vacationer, Jack Van Amberg. At Work with the Ready is created by the Ready. He's so chill. Unlikely. We love you, but that's not your brand. Where we help organizations around the world change the way they work. Thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye, Sam.